Hello and welcome to The Agenda on Politics Social. I'm joined by Phil Moorhouse from A Different Bias. And today we're going to be talking about the honeymoon period since Phil just got married. The honeymoon.
There was no honeymoon.
There's no honeymoon.
We don't do
Well, no,
holidays.
Labour didn't get a honeymoon, did it? It was just like
I think
into nightmare, austerity, Brexit, COVID, riots. World
there's
is on
no
fire.
austerity, or there's no austerity being announced. Lots of people are getting on their high horse about this. Yeah, Labour are going to introduce an austerity budget. Oh, you've seen it, have you? Because at the moment, what I'm seeing is absolutely billions of pounds of extra spending, and I'm seeing £1.5 billion of cuts. Yeah. Which isn't austerity. Austerity would be if overall spending came down. In other words, the number of cuts exceeded the increase in spending. Cutting in one area is not austerity. Austerity is when you cut. It's like in your own household budget, you might cut in one area and increase spending in another. It's only austerity when you cut your overall expenditure. And there's no evidence of that. Now, we don't know. I mean, it might be that the budget comes out and indeed it is an austerity budget. But at the moment, it's like, what's the evidence? Because you've got, if you think about the public...
come on. I mean, Starmer has said it's going to get worse before it gets better. But it's not exactly been like, we're going to...
That is for two reasons. First of all, and again, I don't agree that they're doing this quite right. But he's trying to properly lay it on thick just how bad the Tories left things. Yeah. So that, because he knows in the future, Labour are, like imagine like Labour in 5 years' time have made things a lot better. And then imagine in another 4 or 5 years' time, they've made things better still. Like the more you fix things, the more all you can do to make improvements is its marginal gains. It's like in anything. It's like if you go from being like, you pick up a sport, you learn a sport. Your first 6 months, you'll develop massive skills. It'd be mad how much better you get. Then the next 6 months, a bit more. And after that, it's incremental gains you're making that people won't notice, which means that people think, oh, they're not really doing anything anymore. And then the opposition start to sound a lot more appealing in terms of what they can do. And then you start to lose. So what Starmer's trying to do here is set up this narrative, remember, so that even in 10 or 15 years' time, he might be gone, it's someone else in charge of Labour. They can say, do you remember what the Tories did? Don't let them do it again. So he's laying it on thick.
Shazak 32's point out, by that definition, the 2010 Tory budget was also not an austerity budget, cutting all public spending to enrich the coffers of Tory donors.
Yeah, but they did cut overall spending.
Yeah.
It's just that what happened was because they cut... Because what they actually do, when we say spending, we should really talk about what we mean. Because what they actually did is they cut investment. We ended up with lower tax revenues to go with it, which meant, well, they put the taxes up straight away, actually. So they didn't even, you could imagine there's a narrative whereby they actually thought that shrinking the state would somehow grow the economy, or that whatever, they'd manage on the same tax revenues, something, I don't know. And it just didn't work out. So they ended up having to just raise taxes more and more and more. But they raised taxes straight away. They were in government for like literally a few weeks. It was the next month. They won the election in May. And then in June, they put up VAT, which is a tax that disproportionately hits the poor.
Yes.
So, they didn't even wait for their austerity to not work before they put taxes up. But, it really, the definition is not, there's no tricksiness about it. If overall spending goes up, then it's not an austerity budget. And you look at what we know, the public sector pay was, what's that, 9-10 billion or something like that extra? Yeah. Then you've got the GB Energy. That's another, I can't remember now, it's about 7 billion or something a year. Then you've got the National Wealth Fund, so there's more money in terms of extra spend compared to because you compare it to the baseline is Jeremy Hunt's budget from this year. And it's got billions, tens of billions really of extra spending promises. And so, but what cuts? So there's the winter fuel payments thing, which is believed to be a saving of about 1.5 billion. I suspect not as much, because at the same time they're doing that, they're also trying to make sure more pensioners are on pension credit, which are not at the moment. Like one thing that they're doing that's quite good is Rachel Reeves has said, well, if anyone's getting housing credit, then they should qualify for pension credit. So they're getting it automatically. And that's worth thousands. So that's actually some of the most vulnerable pensioners who didn't realise they qualify for this. The government's just going to give them that money. But there are others who are still going to have to apply for it. So I don't know. But that's about $1.5 billion. Then there's various other projects that they're going to cancel. I think someone mentioned...
It is interesting. Sorry, just to go back onto the winter fuel payment. It is interesting that if that winter fuel payment was going to single mums or going to working people, people will be saying, why are you giving money to everyone who's working when there's people who are millionaires? They don't need that 300 quid. And why are you giving it to people who are lazy? What about the lazy pensioners, Phil? The lazy ones who never worked a day in their life. What about them? They're getting this money for nothing. And so you can turn all those arguments that they use against any other vulnerable minority against,
you can. It is largely hypocrisy. What gets me is the fact that Labour are having a meltdown over this, because I guess I understand why. And I said at the time it was a bit of a bold move of Rachel Reeves, because you're basically taking away. It's a middle class. It's not really a tax break, but it sort of is. But it's not based on tax. So it's not really a tax break, but it's a middle class like payment. And I know that there are people who really need it. And unfortunately, and this is what worries me, there will be some people who really need it who are not going to get it with the way it's set up at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's a concern. Absolutely talk about the level it's set. But that's not what's happening. And I think I know what's happening. I said this before the election when people were saying, it's just going to benefit Labour getting this like super majority. And I kept saying, no, it's actually going to be a pain in the arse for Keir Starmer to have so many Labour MPs, because you've got the MPs that you have in government. If they want to keep their ministerial positions, they toe the line, right? Then you need more in order to get your majority, because only like 120 or something ministers.
Yeah.
So then, and I said you need about 370 MPs to be sure of being able to beat rebellions, right? That's anything beyond that, certainly anything beyond like 390, 400 is a pain in the arse to you. Because these backbenchers, MPs are thick. It's not just Tory MPs that are thick. Not all MPs, but all parties have thick MPs.
Hashtag.
And they don't know what to do. And the problem Labour have got, and I said this before the election as well, they're going to find themselves with over half of their MPs are suddenly brand new MPs, and they don't know what's going on. And what's been happening, right, is they're getting emails from constituents going, oh, I don't like this, stuff like that. And they don't know. They're not able to sort of process it. Like, how do they know that the people who are complaining about it are their key voters? It could be someone who voted Tory. It could be someone who didn't vote at all. It could be just like one or two. So they don't, but they're getting inundated with these messages, right? And they think there's a serious issue that's going to affect their chance of winning the next election. So they're thinking to themselves, not unreasonably in a way, politically, they're thinking to themselves, why have my leadership done this to me and caused me this hassle straight away when I'm a brand new MP, I don't know what I'm doing, for the sake of £1.5 billion? Because it really is. I mean, as soon as it was announced by Rachel Reeves, I thought, bloody hell.
But
because
do you think that
it seems politically a bit mad.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the beginning of the term. I mean, they're in for 4 years.
Oh, well, that's the other thing.
In that time, everyone's going to have forgotten about this. So if this is the most unpopular thing they're planning to do, I feel quite positively about that.
The thing, that's the other side of it. These MPs, like I said after the 2019 election, it surprised me how many new, at that time it was lots of new Conservative MPs, but they didn't know what was going on. Like, they were in the debating chamber, right? And people were waving their order papers about, and apparently they were going, what's this about? And they're like, have you never... Like, you're an MP now, you're top of the tree. You've never actually watched a parliamentary debate. You don't know any. How do you become an MP without actually knowing how parliaments work or the parliamentary process works? But that is the case. And it'll be the case for don't imagine that Labour MPs are enlightened or anything. They're just as thick and ignorant as well as the Tory MPs.
Bloody hell, Phil, don't hold back. Just tell us what you really think.
I do. This is one of the big things I keep saying. When I was really young, one of the biggest things I learnt in politics in my life was when I was young, I assumed that MPs had to be like politically astute people because, I mean, you had to persuade all of your local party to select you as their champion, and then you had to persuade a load of people to vote for you to get. So I thought, MPs would have to be not always political geniuses. I got that there was a variation there, but at least astute. Politically competent. Yeah. And one of the biggest veils being taken away from my eyes was actually realised, no, there's lots of MPs are as thick as mints, and it's because
I had a similar. Go on.
You put a particular coloured rosette on a pig in a particular area, and just people will vote for it. Therefore, you don't need your local party to vote for some great political champion. So in a safe seat, actually, they'll just vote for someone who's going to toe their line. So with our political system, there's a benefit to both the party and the local party in having quite a lot of thick MPs who'll just do as they're told.
Well, I was going to say, this isn't just MPs, mate. This was the big realisation that I had growing up, is that everyone's just making it up as they go along. Literally everyone, Phil. There's a handful of experts who apparently we're supposed to ignore now.
Yeah.
And then that's it. It's everyone else, and they're all just scrabbling. That's why when you see videos on the internet or Instagram reels of people who are like the perfect mom or the perfect family, and they put all these pictures out, none of it's real. Everyone has self-doubt. Everyone has crisis of confidence. Everyone has some kind of imposter syndrome.
Except those who went to eat it because they're deliberately have it beaten out of them.
They've had it taken
That's its thing. That's what it does.
I just want to say a big thank you to Ivan Ambrose for the first super chat of the show. When will there be the slightest hint of contrition and humility from the Tories about their dire mess and destruction? I take it that the tiniest hint is too much to ask for.
It will come. It will come when all the people responsible are gone. It's the same with Grenfell. If you listen to the Grenfell speeches yesterday, Rishi Sunak, it wasn't just Keir Starmer who apologised. Easy for him to apologise. No one blames him. But Rishi Sunak as well offered a full apology. There was no attempt from his part to get out of any of the findings in the report at all. Why? Because ultimately people don't hold him responsible either.
Yeah.
He was only just being made an MP when it happened, realistically. And the same thing will happen with the Tory mess. Once all of those, so when the current leadership candidates, whether bad or not, once all those have basically had their go and messed it up, and you've got a completely. If you think about the front bench of the Tory front bench in 2010, just as they were about to win the election, there were a few old hands there like William Hague, but mostly it was people you wouldn't have known of in 1997. So when we get to that point, that's when they'll start to be a bit more honest. When there's no personal responsibility, when they're apologising on behalf of the party, not themselves, because their ego can't take apologising themselves.
That's true. George, thank you very much for the super chat, mate. Lazy pensioners, would that be said? Really? No, it wouldn't. No. They would never call out the lazy pensioners, who must exist.
Because you're allowed to be lazy when you're a pensioner. Let's be honest,
exactly.
That's the whole point.
You're not doing anything, but it's fine. It's okay. But yeah, it's mad, isn't it? But yeah, I thank you very much for the super chat. Big hello to Daily Blase in there as well. All right, Darren, how you doing, mate? Nick is in there. Someone needs to remind Starmer that he has a huge majority and at least half a decade to sort things out. Maybe that might ease his Brexit timidity. We'll get on to this, Phil, because I know you have a lot to say on that one. Yeah. Someone was asking if we have a phone in. We can't employ staff, unfortunately, to man.
That'd be asking for trouble, wouldn't it?
Can
you imagine?
We're not global. We weren't set up by a billionaire who went to private school. It's just me and Phil. Anthony says, to me, the winter fuel thing will be like ULEZ 2.0. Everyone will be up in arms about it, but when it comes out, people find out that they're entitled to it. They'll be like, oh, well, yeah. You talked about ULEZ. You were right about ULEZ. You went, this is going to be a big thing now, but come next year.
I don't think it is quite the same, though, because I think there are people who need the winter fuel payments who are not going to get it. And my fear is politically, and this has always been my fear politically, is that, so there are thousands of pensioners who die every year from their home being too cold. Not a lot of people know about it because the media don't make a big fuss about it. Because
but they will.
They did, they'd be making a fuss about poverty. But there'll be people from the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, the Sun. They will be sniffing around. They just want to find one pensioner who died who had their winter fuel payment denied. That's what they'll want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can see that being politically tricky.
But I mean, someone who, do you think there's anyone out there who could get it? Do you think it's going to be someone who could have had it, but they didn't know that they were entitled to it?
It would still be messy. You can try and argue that it'll still be messy, but the way it sounds to me, because the thing is, like, the pension credit level was set by the Conservatives, so it's not going to be set, even though it's for pensioners and they tend to be more generous with pensioners than other groups. It's not like, I absolutely believe that people just above the threshold for pension credit, let's say you're £50 above, right? So you're effectively losing out on £150 if you think about it that way. I can absolutely believe that some of those people will not put on their heating because they don't think they can afford it. So what I would have done, I'd have worked on the basis that it is better to give it to some people who don't need it than to deny it to anyone who does.
Right.
So,
this is the argument.
They've done it the other way around. I think they've set the level, particularly as, there are some genuine criticisms. It's very late in the day to be announcing it. The reason why she announced it in June rather than wait for the budget, because it would be too bloody late. So they've announced it very late in the day. It's not a lot of time. We knew that bills would be going up as well this autumn, double trouble. I would just have said, err on the side of being a bit generous this year, and you can always fine tune it in future years.
Yeah, I guess. Show us the data. This is from Plebs of us. Show us the data before you make them claims about winter fuel allowances in regards of them who need it or don't. Labour are just speculating instead of going with proven data. Another issue that you just sort of touched upon is the fact that there's a cliff edge, isn't there? Where if you are £50 over, you're going to be out of pocket. So as with a lot of things, I think it would make so much more sense to have a gradual reduction until you get to the point where you're not out of pocket.
That would have to take longer, though, because things like that tend to be more complex to administer, also costly to administer.
We've got AI now. We can do anything.
Yeah, but not this quickly. But again, that is also arguably another reason why maybe this shouldn't have been brought in this year. Even though I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to do all of the unpopular stuff now so that in future budgets, it's all increasingly like, we're now, because that's what they want to do, presumably next year. I hope they don't want to do two budgets like this. I'm assuming this is it. And then, so that what they can do next year is say, because we took this action, and people didn't like it, but because we took this action now, it now means we can do this, 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 and this, which we wouldn't have ordinarily been able to do.
That's been Starmer's sort of excuse, hasn't it? It's like, actually, the economy being bad kills more people, not just pensioners, but everyone across the board, than...
but I mean, another thing they could do is if they link it now, for example, they've linked some things in their manifesto. They linked the VAT on private schools. Someone mentioned in the chat there, Eton are putting their prices up. It's like, and the Telegraph are going, oh no, what about the poor working class
Eton,
people that go to
doubled
Eton?
their price in the last 20 years. Is that the same Eton?
That's the same Eton.
Oh, okay.
So, but anyway, Labour linked the increase in the applying, they didn't increase VAT, the applying of VAT to private schools to paying for more teachers in state schools and breakfast clubs. So you get a policy that the Tories are going to go mad about, but you link it to something that will be popular. I don't know why Rachel Reeves, even though it wouldn't be true, like if she reckons it's going to save £1.5 billion, point out £1.5 billion of extra spending that she can say, well, which do you want? Then you can present it like that to people. Which do you want? Do you want millionaire? And I know it's not just millionaire pensioners that listen out.
You don't feel like they've handled this particularly well?
No. I think I know what they're trying to do. I just think it's unnecessary. It's like they're obsessed with making everyone aware that the Tories have caused this mess. But the result of it is they've created a row within their own party now.
Yeah.
Because you've got all these MPs, and going back to the idea of MPs don't understand it, like you say about the parliamentary cycle, you do your unpopular stuff now, and then people have forgotten about it or whatever by the time of the election. But they don't necessarily think like that. They've just become a brand new MP. Some of them didn't even expect to be an MP. They were paid. So there were some paper candidates that won, and they don't know what's going on, and they're getting it in the neck, and they think, obviously, quite rightly, that they need to, support their constituents, but they don't necessarily realise that you have a disproportionate number of people writing into MPs who don't necessarily represent you've got to try and work out, is this representative or is it not? And they're not able to make that call because they're brand new.
Go on.
And they're just they're losing their heads about it. But then Starmer said there'll be a vote next week. I think, are you crazy? Why would Labour backbenchers even want to vote on this? Yeah. Why would they want to vote on it? That's incredibly damaging. Because now if it's one thing, like if backbenchers say, they can write back to the constituents, say, yeah, we're concerned about this and I'm making representation. They can even stand up in Parliament and say, I have these concerns, or these are the concerns of my constituents. And they've had the say, they've done what they need to do as an MP, right? By having a vote, they're basically going to have to vote for it.
Yeah.
And Labour are also putting other MPs who maybe don't feel that they should in the position. And what's he going to do? Remove the whip from those who vote to it's like, Matt, and you don't need to vote for something like this. It's a part of the budget. You vote for the budget, the whole budget. You don't vote for an individual part of it.
Yeah.
Don't vote for something like this. It's secondary legislation. It's already been enacted. You don't, no, why have a vote on it? If I were a Labour MP, I'd make sure I was nowhere near London on that day.
Yeah. But, yeah. It could be the first defeat.
I strongly suspect not.
It would be mad if it was, though, wouldn't it? Thank you very much to Kay for the £5 super chat. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Watching this issue with the budget, the Tories are mentioning the train drivers, but does the government even pay them?
Some of them. Some are in public hands, but technically, it's the train companies. But the government sort of, they're not privatised to the same extent as some other private utilities. They, for example, train companies wanted to come to an arrangement with, rail workers, RMT mostly, a couple of years ago. And it was Grant Shapps, who was at the time Transport Secretary, who blocked them. So the government do have a lot to say. But technically, when they're making a thing about train drivers, it doesn't come out of the taxes, if that's what you mean. No.
Well, no, because the tabloids this week were trying to link the fact, and the Tories were trotting out this line, that they were trying to make it so that in people's minds who aren't paying too much attention to politics, they're taking money off freezing cold pensioners, little old ladies,
I've seen Claire
and
Coutinho
giving
try
it
that.
To train drivers who are already earning £65,000 a year.
Yeah,
but
they're not. It comes out of it. It comes out of your rail fare. Even the publicly operated ones like LNER, who are potentially going to prevent me getting to the Rejoin March. I'm going to have to check on that, bastards. But that still doesn't come out of our taxes. That comes out of rail fare still, same as the privatised companies. It's just that any profits made would go to the Treasury.
Yeah. So you're going to the march?
I'm going to hope to go to the march,
good.
if I can physically get there, because guess which train company is the only one that goes from Doncaster to London?
LNER.
Or anyway, LNER.
No, you can get Grand Central. Oh, no, they don't stop there, do they?
It's LNER, Aviva or something. I can't remember. Something like that. It's LNER anyway. That's the only one that does it.
And they don't have single return fares anymore.
Can't remember. I don't travel often enough to care.
Well, I do. I used to get a reverse charge call. No, a return ticket to London, and then what I'll do is I'd always try and get the last train, because they don't normally check your tickets on the last train. So as long as I hadn't actually put my return ticket through a machine or anything like that, I could use it again. Possibly. Don't sue me.
I'm going to say it's a bit dishonest. I don't do that. Yeah. But.
Mate, do you know what's dishonest? The fact that it's £163 to get to London and back on the train.
Badges, my badger cake again.
Oh, was that your wedding cake?
That was the wedding cake.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Little Mr. and Mrs. Badger.
Oh, oh, oh,
I'll
oh.
just leave that there. Right.
So Phil got married last week, for those not in the know on this channel. By the way, if any of you want to join in the chat, there's a few people whose names I've not seen before. So if you want to join us, just subscribe to the channel. That's how you can get into the chat. That's your secret code to get into the chat. And then you got to wait like 30 seconds or something. You can write things. Last Train from London is an ELO reference, according to Nick. Kay says Eleanor was brilliant when it was East Coast before Cameron sold it to Virgin, even though it was profitable. Patrick wants to know, can you still do reverse charge calls? I have no idea.
No idea.
I don't think so. Try dialing 100 into your landline if you've got a landline and see if it gets you the operator. Anthony Fisher, do you think maybe it would have been better to introduce a windfall tax on energy companies to cover winter fuel this year, and then next year they'll have the time to fine-tune it?
Well, the windfall tax on oil and energy companies has already been earmarked for Great British Energy. So that was that was already in the manifesto, and that was already linked. So
okay,
but I do think what they should have done, knowing it would be politically, in Yes Minister speak, courageous at the very least, they should have linked it to something popular. It was inevitably going to be unpopular. Yeah. So you link it to, because at the moment, the way it's being, it's almost like it's just going into that £22 billion black hole. And it's all right them saying, well, yeah, but we have to fill it in. The Tories didn't tell us about this. They lied about it. And we promised in our manifesto we would balance the books from day one, which they have. It's a manifesto promise. Labour MPs can't moan about it. But why not just link it to something? Because they're not just cutting and they're not just raising taxes. They are actually spending more in some areas. They are making some people's lives better. Why not plug that? Yeah. And they must be able to find £1.5 billion of some spending increase that they can link it to. Just do that and make it about, which one do you want? Do you want million? And I know it's not all millionaire pensioners, but politics tends to work on extremes. Do you want millionaire pensioners getting 200 quid they don't need so they can buy some like 5 scones from Harrods or something? Or do you want you probably wouldn't even get 5 from Harrods, would you? Or do you want this other thing that actually sounds quite useful?
Yeah, but they haven't done that because, Labour sometimes do things that are just pretty inexplicable.
I'm just going to point out here, I do often feel like I'm holding the Starmer banner quite a lot, even though I don't actually support anyone. Super Tiny there said Starmer seems unambitious. No, I think he sounds very ambitious. I think if you pay very careful attention to what he does, if anything, he's too ambitious. First of all, you mentioned Brexit. People are saying, his Brexit things doesn't, because he's not talking about going to the single market, which is physically impossible for him to do anyway. And they think, it doesn't sound very ambitious. But actually, when you listen to EU policy experts, they say, if anything, what he's saying sounds too ambitious. You think about the housing targets, 1.5 million new homes. People in the construction industry think that's too ambitious. They think he'll probably struggle. Then you think back to the Grenfell speech yesterday. All people required of Keir Starmer was to know that, first of all, the government accepted the report completely, that the government would make sure that it put its own house in order to prevent a future occurrence, and that the government would support proper sanctions, like criminal investigations, basically prosecutions, for those responsible, which sounds like it's going to take years. That's all they wanted from him. And yet, in his speech, he talked about the fact that what we had with Grenfell was an issue of certain people being treated like second-class citizens, that because the people in that tower block were people from certain demographics that are largely ignored by politicians, that is why it's taken this length of time to get anything done. So he's made it like he's not made it an isolated case. He's made it part of a wider move. And by making himself personally responsible as well, he's made it part of a wider cultural change. That sounds very ambitious to me, because what he's talking about is nothing less than having lots of people in our society who are marginalized, who are often ignored, not in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So actually, I think he's very ambitious. And a lot of what he's trying to do probably won't be able to do, but maybe that's just my natural cynicism, born of the fact that I've seen lots of different governments all arse lots of things up.
Yeah, indeed. Well, talking of arsing things up, the Grenfell Tower inquiry came out this week, and it turns out that there was scumbaggery at every level. Now, the interesting thing in here is that the government and the local council have apologised for their ineptness, but the companies behind the cladding, have all just come out all guns blazers, doubled down. No, we didn't do anything wrong. Everything's fine. We weren't cheating or lying.
Yeah,
And one of the guys who was mentioned in the inquiry 100 times says that he's done nothing wrong. Now, there was a story in The Guardian today that's going to take 5 years for any kind of wheels of justice to even start to turn. Do you think this is something that Keir Starmer and Labour can actually...
Not really. I mean, obviously, governments don't prosecute people. Where the hold-up will be, so at the moment, the Met Police reckon it'll take about 1.5 years. I've seen various arguments and counter-arguments as to whether this is fair or not. So I've seen experts, some of whom have said it shouldn't take that long, and others of whom have said, yeah, actually, it will take that long. All I would say is I would rather it took 1.5 years and we had proper evidence handed over to the CPS that could secure convictions than to do a rush job and lots of people get off on technicalities. Where the hold-up will be is the fact that our criminal justice system has massive backlogs. So all the government can actually do, and I don't know how quickly they can do it anyway, is obviously they actually need to build more prisons, or fundamentally change our attitude to who we send to prison, because we don't have the prison capacity, but we also don't have the court capacity. Loads of, the Tories literally since 2010 have shut down half the magistrates' courts in the land. Other courts as well are largely abandoned. So, which means that even very serious cases very often take years to come to court. And this will not be considered as serious as, say, a rape or something like that, because the person is not likely to reoffend, you could argue.
Come on, Phil. 72
but what do you do?
Died.
Like, in order to prosecute, for example, the rioters, they've had to put other people back in the queue for trials coming to court. So, we just don't have the court capacity. And it would take years to build it up. So it'd be too late for anything that needs to go through the system now. So, what should have happened, the thing I've read that did make sense to me, is what should have happened is they should have pursued the criminal cases before the public inquiry.
Yeah.
That's what they should have done, and they didn't. So that's where the real failure was.
Some Tories and Tory donors would have been on the hook.
Precisely. But that is where it went wrong. At this point in time, it's like, well, how do you expedite it without sending others to the back of the queue? You're talking about sending rape victims, telling them, oh yeah, you're already going to go through hell. It's going to take 3 years for this thing to come to trial anyway. Would you mind waiting another 2 years with your victim walking, with your attacker walking free? It's things like that. There's nothing to be done about it. We haven't got the court capacity.
That's disgraceful. Anyway, also I just want to have a mention for the first Prime Minister's questions back after the summer recess. This is only the second Prime Minister's questions, and Keir Starmer came across as he got a lot of stuff wrong, including calling Rishi Sunak
Prime Minister
the
5
Prime Minister.
times.
He kept calling him the Prime Minister, and even his own MPs, you can see them rolling their eyes behind him. Go, stop calling him the Prime Minister, you dickhead. He needs to get better at this, Phil. Does he not practice?
Well, he doesn't have to get. Well, he doesn't have to get better right now, because look what's opposite him. Like, Rishi Sunak can't be asked. They really. I know a lot of Tory MPs thought, we want him to stick on until the new leader's chosen. They'd have been better off with an interim. If he couldn't be asked, if he's not up for it, and he's not up for it, they should have got an interim leader. They'd have been actually better off with Ian Duncan Smith. I said at the time, he wouldn't actually have been a bad pick for interim leader. Because, he was useless as well. He was crap, but he'd at least have been up for it, and he's experienced.
Yeah.
and then then think about after November who he's going to go up against him.
Well,
he's going to have
can we
Kemi
talk about
Badenoch's useless. Robert Jenrick's he's a bit shit. James Cleverly.
Kemi Badenoch's horrible though. I mean, I don't want her having.
She's nowhere near as bad as Suella Braverman.
Six horrible questions in a row.
But she's
pretty bad, Phil. She's pretty bad.
But,
so you were telling me actually that the leadership contest might get whittled down even earlier than expected because don't they have to pay like a ridiculous amount of money to the Tory party to run?
Yeah. So what I gather is, so it started off. The candidates had to have 10 MPs nominate them. So we ended up with 6 who could get 10 nominations. There's only like 121 MPs anyway, something like that. And so then we had 6, but then they're going to whittle it down to 4 in time for the conference. Then those 4 get to, because what's the conference going to be about? It's nothing. So it's basically going to be a platform for those 4 to strut their stuff. And then they're going to knock another 2 out before the final 2 go to the ballot for members. But apparently, once it's got whittled down to this last 4, the remaining ones have to basically sign a cheque for £200,000 payable to the Conservative Party. Because they're so hard up. Because they're so hard up at the moment.
My God.
But not many of them, according to this report, and I wish I could remember where I'd read it, but it was one of the mainstream papers. According to this report, not many of them have raised anywhere near that. Robert Jenrick's raised about $250,000.
Yeah.
I think Kemi Badenoch might have raised about 200,000, but some of it she will be spending on her campaign. And the other ones, it's like a few tens of thousands. No one's really giving the other ones much, or they're not very good at raising money.
We just had a massive super chat come in from Ivan. Thank you so much, Ivan. That's very kind of you. The Tories are continuing to shamefully defend their policy of single-worded judgments on schools, Ofsted reports, which caused a head teacher to take her own life. What about if it was one of their family members or friends? Well, I keep saying this. Private schools don't have to be inspected by Ofsted if they don't want to be, which you might think is a massive safeguarding issue.
It is.
And you'll be right. You'll be absolutely right. And that's why so much abuse goes on in private schools, and then that internalized trauma gets taken out on the rest of us when these people get into positions of extreme power.
Because although Labour have dropped this thing now, which is good, they still have fundamentally the wrong idea about Ofsted, I would argue. They keep trying to suggest that Ofsted exists to drive up standards. Like, no, they don't. Or they shouldn't. That's why it keeps going wrong. And that's why Ofsted will always be wrong. It's ever since I started teaching, it's never been fit for purpose. And it's changed a lot. And it has gone through periods when it has improved a lot, but it's never been fit for purpose. It shouldn't be seen as something to try and drive up standards. Your government policies do that. If you think there's some policy that will drive up standards, then you announce the policy and the schools will do it. Oh, how do we know the schools will do it? That's what Ofsted should be for. They should just go in and check that schools and colleges are doing things according to the regulations. Are you following these regulations? Yes or no? It shouldn't be.
Do they have to check if they're following the national curriculum? The national curriculum that private schools don't have to follow.
Yeah. So, but that's why as well. If you were to make Ofsted fit for purpose, private schools would have to be inspected.
Yes.
Because one of the most important things that Ofsted do is making sure that schools and colleges follow the rules. That includes laws as well as regulations. And as soon as we get a government that realises that ultimately that is what an inspectorate should do, then they'll also realise that private schools should be inspected.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the moment they don't. I mean, Labour better, but still.
Plebs of Us is saying, very sad to see many MPs walk out of the Commons before Starmer made that speech on Grenfell. Now, there is an issue here that, like, a lot of those MPs would have been sitting in that chamber for a couple of hours at that point and may have gone out to go to the toilet and come back.
I said this. It's a bad look.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they needed a piss. And they'll have probably had a quick lunch before they had to go into the chamber in the morning as well. So they've had something to drink. So some of them will really, and maybe not all of them will have done, because obviously there were some people who did. Keir Starmer will have been there for a bit. He'd have been there from 12 o'clock. So
Yeah, but he just walked into the chamber at 12. You've already
he did, yeah.
If you
There
want
were
a good
some MPs
spot,
who were there
you've got to
before.
be there
Yeah.
ages before. You've got to sit through a whole debate about Wales or something. No
Yeah.
offence to Wales.
But yeah, you do have as well, like you say,
Country
half an hour before PMQs, there's always a debate on something. It could be Welsh questions, Scottish questions, equalities questions, science questions, usually some minor ministry or devolved issues. But it's so yeah, some MPs will have been there. They'll have had their lunch early, so they'll have been drinking, not necessarily boozing, but drinking, and then 2 hours later they do want to piss.
Yeah.
So it's a bad look. I'm not someone who would bother to draw attention to it because, it doesn't necessarily mean they didn't care. It just meant they needed a piss.
Yeah. Nova 510 is asking, did the report check if a fire, it's going back to Grenfell, would have been as deadly if the cladding wasn't on the side of the building? Yes, and it would not have been as deadly. Like, it probably wouldn't have killed anyone. Because
that's the point, yeah.
Essentially, you had an a tower block that was built in the 60s, 70s, that each floor was isolated from the other floor. So if there was a fire on the 7th story, it couldn't set fire to the 8th story or the 6th story. Whereas if you have a flammable cladding on the outside of the building, the flames just go outside and come back in. Go outside, come back in, and that's effectively what they did. Plus, there was aluminium oxide. I think you're the scientist, Phil. It was something that goes up like a goddamn firecracker.
One of the other problems as well is how they sort of fiddled it is with the cladding panels. There are like two configurations. One of them is just flat cladding, and those are the ones. The flat sheets are the ones that passed the safety test. Yeah. But then there's another arrangement. It's sort of like an L shape, which don't pass it. They're the ones they used. But because they say, but they passed the thing, it's like, but in a different arrangement.
Cheated, didn't they? They cheated on the tests. They used different materials in the tests.
There were multiple levels of naughtiness,
There was, it's beyond naughtiness, I think. It's just criminality, I think is the word that I would use. These people need
I'm not a lawyer, but certainly some of them must have been criminally responsible. I just don't necessarily know who. But those who aren't, I mean, it's one of these cases where what we should look at, unfortunately, this will be years down the line now, but when it's all settled, this is what government should do. You look at, so who was prosecuted successfully and therefore convicted, therefore everything pertaining to them, the law was fine for. Was there anyone who seemed to get away with it, who's clearly in the wrong and responsible for those deaths, but somehow wasn't criminally responsible, in which case that's when you should look at changing the law.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a super chat come in from Nova 510. Thank you so much, Nova. If you judge the schools on something, that's all they'll do. How do we get around this teaching to pass the test, not the subject, or how to work it out? Well, I mean, teaching to pass the test, not the subject, you can't really do much about that at GCSE and A level. But don't forget, when we talk about the national curriculum, there's stuff in there that state schools have to teach the kids that private schools don't have to teach the kids because it's not in the exam, so they don't bother teaching it, which is unfair. I mean, the whole system is so ridiculously unfair as it is.
The problem we have with assessment is we also need a fundamental rethink about assessment. The only reason there is an issue with teaching to the test instead of the subject is because there's a disconnect between the test and the subject.
Yes.
Now, one of the problems we have is like we now go to increasing lengths to make sure students can't cheat by looking things up on their phone. And it's like, well, there was a time when I was a maths teacher, and I was one of those maths teachers who would go, you won't have your calculator in the shops, will you? And then now, of course, everyone does. Yes. So you can't use that line, but that's fine. You adapt. And we should do the same thing. Why are we testing people on recall for things they could quickly look up on their phone? Because it's not realistic. You're not preparing them for the world of work. Yeah. The whole point of it, particularly almost do what you like in universities. But if what you're supposed to be doing with compulsory education is preparing people for the world of work, you're not doing that by using an examination system from Victorian times. So, okay, it's come on a little bit since then, but not much. Well, so we should modernize it. We should accept the fact there is no point in anyone who needs to recall a particular fact for their job will do so anyway, because they'll just be using it all the time. Like there were certain equations I could recall quite easily. I can't now because I haven't used them for years. And but I could easily look them up if I needed them again. So stop making people remember things that they can easily look up. It's a waste of time.
This is pretty bad. For my A-levels, I had to write about Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence and The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood. I didn't read the books. I just read what I needed to regurgitate in the exam.
Right. And you knew what that was then?
I mean, that's all you have to do. I
mean, things like that. I mean, and it's been a bugbear of mine as a teacher for quite a while because it's not something that's even that modern. The assessments have always been unfit for purpose, and there's no need for it. We're always changing. In the time I've been in education, they've changed the way A-levels work like 3 times.
Yeah.
At no point did they ever think to themselves, should we actually change them so they're fit for the modern world?
Well, Sarah points out, sure, you can judge their work for the year. Don't hold an exam. I don't know about that because a lot of the teachers in my school didn't like me very much, and I assume they had their favourites as well. And I know you're going to hate me saying this, Phil, but you're not supposed to have your favourites. I think it's like with kids. If you have kids, you're not supposed to have favourites amongst your own children. But people do. People absolutely, oh my God, they totally do. And I think that when you do really well in the exam and the teacher's response is, that was a fluke result, it's a bit like, really? That's what you're going for? The usual.
But even without that, you're always going to have a situation where teachers are held professionally responsible for the results. So if you let them decide what the results are, there's a conflict of interest. Exactly. There has to be some independently verified evidence for it.
Yeah. But
even when you have coursework, even when you have coursework, there's some independent verification process that goes on.
Yeah.
To make sure you just haven't given someone a pass for no reason.
Well, this is again what happened in private schools during COVID, is that those kids doing their GCSEs and A-levels were given inflated results compared with state schools.
And the thing is, state schools in the end could have done that, but I'll tell you, because I worked in a college at the time, and we had loads of meetings, and we went. Do you know what we spent so much time working on the assumption that someone would come in to check our methodology, and we made sure we could justify every single grade for every single student. And the reason we did that and private schools didn't is because private schools ultimately knew the government wouldn't do that they would never send anyone in to check.
Yeah.
So to ask them, why have you given this student this grade? Whereas everyone in state education, I was working, even though I was doing YouTube at the time, I was doing part-time teaching in a college. We worked on the assumption someone could easily be sent in, so we had to be ready for that.
Yeah.
And that was the difference. That was why private schools massively inflated their grades. They knew no one would go in and check them and call and ask them to justify. Whereas everyone in state education worked on the assumption that someone would come in and ask very searching questions. And expect a lot of evidence.
Bully Wags is saying we should make a second language. What about making second language compulsory in the rest of the world? Well, you see, I have my own feelings about this because I'm not particularly gifted with languages. I can barely speak English, for God's sake. And I really struggled in school with Spanish and French. I wasn't incredibly terrible, but I wasn't particularly good either.
Did you start at 11 in comprehensive school?
Yes.
So you should start year 1.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. It's a lot easier if you learn a lot younger. But also, here's the thing about, my travels around the world. My Spanish had to be better when I'm talking to someone in South America or in Spain, or my French had to be better if I was talking to someone in Africa. My French had to be better than their English. And 99 times out of 100, when I was talking to someone, their English was better. So we conversed in English because then both of us knew, a bit more what we were talking about than otherwise would be the case. So, yeah, I do understand and appreciate that people who are good at languages and excel at languages have a case for other people learning it. I do think, I agree with Phil saying if you're going to do it young. But at the same time, I just found it really demoralising that I was great at English, great at maths, great at history and geography, and I was just terrible at languages, and it just really I found it quite depressing.
If you do it, the reason why we don't do it is we haven't got the staff to do it. We haven't got, and like you'd pick a language, that's fine. We could just pick French. I don't like French myself as a language. I much prefer German, but we would probably pick French. You just go with French, whatever. It means you can go to Canada as well, I suppose. And we haven't got enough. We haven't got enough. Maybe pick Spanish.
I had to learn, if going against my head, learn another language, it'd be Spanish all day long. Would
that be economically more useful to do? Because you'd pick the one economically most useful one, wouldn't you? Which arguably
it's the one
German
that it's the one that most countries speak. No one speaks German.
But is it most countries
Germany,
that people would likely
Austria,
go and work in?
Bit of Switzerland and Namibia.
But which countries would someone from Britain, if language wasn't a barrier, be most likely to go and work in?
Well, there's loads of people in America that speak Spanish. There's not as many that speak French.
How many people from Britain? Like, wouldn't you have thought you were more likely to get a job on your own continent?
Yeah. My second choice would be French. I would not learn German. I just wouldn't.
But either way, but whichever one gets picked, because you would have to pick one. Whichever one gets picked.
But every German I've ever met speaks English, so you'll start the conversation and then they'll find it very frustrating that you keep getting words and tenses and gender pronouns wrong,
yeah, they should
and
get
then
rid
they
of
will
all
switch
that.
to English.
Look how much trouble we have with gender pronouns in English, and we have them for almost nothing, only people. So Germany, you should bin the lot of them. You don't need them. You only need one word for them or they or the. You only need one word. Don't need three.
But yeah, I mean, I think that people who are good at languages...
Why does a table need a gender?
Exactly. But one of the things that I'm very pleased about is, and I wish it was this September that it was starting, is next year, finally, BSL, an actual living language that is spoken, or that is used by, well, you mouth the word as well, so it is kind of spoken, by over 1 million people in this country, isn't a GCSE, but Latin is. Like, Latin is a GCSE. And I'm like, how does that work?
I know.
But I also very much disagree with being forced to do RE as a GCSE. Sorry, mate. As a militant
just put it in as it's just like it's a cultural thing. You could mix it in with other cultural studies.
No, why?
Because
do I
then
have
you
to
can
know
understand.
what
Because
what
then
people
you can
thought
understand.
2,000
No,
years
it's not
ago?
what people thought 200,000. It's what people think now. It's understanding different. You know, if you want to reduce like.
I don't think you study Scientology.
Division. No, don't study Scientology.
So it's from 2,000 years ago then. I don't mind it being a subject. I just don't think it should be compulsory.
Yeah, no, you should absolutely understand other people's cultures. Otherwise, you give a window to the pissing Daily Mail to misinform you about what. It's bad enough as it is. They'll say, "Oh, all Muslims are like this. They all want this, you know. It's all very bad." It's like, no, they don't.
You've got millions of people in this country who did RE for GCSE because they had to, and but
that's because they didn't learn it. The problem was they didn't learn it. Like, have you seen Lee Anderson today? Right?
Yeah,
he's having a pop. He says, migrants, obviously, asylum seekers. And this is what he said: we have British charities in Calais encouraging these illegal migrants to their camps where they shelter, feed, give them phones, data, and learn them to speak English.
Okay, fair enough. But I mean, like, that's nothing to do with religion, though, is it?
No, it's to do with but if people, what I'm saying is, if people actually learned in there, if we maybe had systems where people actually took if we stopped, because we try to teach too broad a curriculum in this country instead of focusing on making sure people understand things they should know. So if we did that,
fine, but I wouldn't make it compulsory.
Yes. No, I would.
Maybe in the first 3 years of senior school, secondary school, high school, whatever you want to call it. Maybe. But to make it a GCSE in civics...
Yeah, but it's not compulsory. RE is not compulsory at GCSE.
It is. My stepdaughter has to do it. She has no choice.
That's her school.
That's
not the
law.
It's
compulsory at that school.
Okay, well, that's
and
the school.
there were hundreds of schools like that. School. around the country,
Yeah, but
and I think it is dead wrong.
The government haven't told them to do that.
She's
I
only
don't
gonna
know
get to
whether
do
the
GCSEs once, and I feel like she's wasting her time on a subject that
I
will come in no use whatsoever when she is older.
I never had to do it.
I didn't do it.
I actually had lots of compulsory. Of the 10 GCSEs I did, 8 were compulsory, which was horrific. My sister, who's only a couple of years below me, she got much more choice than I did. Yeah. I had to do loads of things I wouldn't have chosen to do.
Well, I had to do CDT, and it meant I couldn't do geography and history.
Yeah, you said about this. Whereas I had to do geography and histoy. These were compulsory ones. And French.
I mean, if you're going to do one, you should do the other. But I mean, yeah, I had to do French as well. In fact, a lot of the things I had to do for GCSE, I think over half of them were compulsory. I think I say in it.
80% of mine were compulsory. I got 2 choices. I chose 2 of my subjects.
Wow.
And that was
the illusionist capitalism, isn't it? Late stage capitalism, Phil.
Design and technology in German I chose to do.
The problem is, because it was CDT when I did it, it was craft design and technology. And the teachers didn't know anything about technology. They knew how to make things out of wood.
Well, there were 3 versions at our school. There was design and technology, which was like electronics mostly, although you did have to work a little bit about how gears worked as well. Then there was some material stuff in there as well. Then there was design and communication, which was technical drawing, which is what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Then there was design and realization, which was your woodwork and your metalwork. And I think I told you this before. I put down for design and communication, but persuaded a load of my mates to put down for it as well. And even though they put down it on after I did, they somehow got into the class and I didn't. And a technology teacher, CDT teacher, came over to me and said, "Oh, I see you've put down for design and realization." I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Oh, well, your name's down on that." I said, "No, I put down for communications." "Oh, well, that's full." He said, "We think you might be better doing design technology." And he was basically trying to, in a polite way, tell me that design and realization was for the thick kids.
Wow.
Because it was, metalwork and woodwork.
Yeah, but
like the old Paul Merton joke, isn't it?
That's
Where
actually
his O-level in metalwork. It is useful.
Yeah, it's useful in later life, whereas other stuff...
But design technology was useful as well.
Ernie Burns says practical civics, students need to work on a community project. I agree. No, but going back to CDT, like I should have learnt programming in school, but we didn't because we didn't have the funding to pay for computers that were
actually at the time it was because Thatcher had binned it. When I went to comprehensive school, we did learn programming.
Yeah,
literally for 2 years, and that was in the 80s, and then the Thatcher government binned it. So at the time, I suppose we were never going to really compete with America, but we were one of the leading computer countries in the world.
Yep.
And then the government, apparently it was caused by the government basically saying to industry, what should we teach them? And they said, oh, well, you just need to teach them how to use the computers. So basically IT. And she went, all right, we'll do that then. And then all of a sudden, oh, why aren't we a world leader in computing anymore? Do you think it might be because you stopped teaching us computing?
Yeah.
Because I was learning it.
I
was being taught it in school.
David Faulkner's just dropped in a super chat. Thank you so much, David. All the way from Hong Kong. I get frustrated with people who live here in Hong Kong for many years but never bother to learn even a single Chinese character. That's madness, isn't it? Because, I mean, there's a difference between living in the UK and maybe going on holiday for 2 weeks each year in a country that speaks a different language, but actually living there all that time, come on, pick up a single character. But when I was when I went to China, the first time I went there was in 2002, and apart from Hong Kong, I found it very difficult getting around China because there was no English. There was English. There were no Roman letters. There's no Latin characters anywhere. Yeah. It was all Chinese characters.
Yeah.
So you wanted to get on a bus, you had to see the 2 characters that spelt out Beijing, and you had to get on that bus. If you got on the wrong one, you could end up 1,000 miles in the wrong direction. However, after I went back in 2010, I did notice that probably as a result of the Beijing Olympics in 2008, a lot of the signage in the bus station and the trains and all that, they actually had Latin characters come up. But at the same time, it's quite fun to learn some Chinese characters, to be able to identify them and go,
these days you could use your phone to snap it and translate, couldn't you?
Yeah. but the pictograms, they were originally little drawings.
Yeah.
So the symbol, and David's going to correct me here, but I think the symbol in Mandarin for like an administrator is a stick man measuring a tree. And then over the years, that's become this little,
there's combinations as well, hasn't there?
Exit is a gate. Exit
So
is literally a
there were
gate.
things like, what was it, like lemon tea or something is like a lemon, the symbol for lemon and the symbol for water or something like that as well. So it's like, it sort of makes sense in a way. But I do think like Roman style letters or even Greek style letters are better.
Gillian's just dropped a super chat in. Thank you so much, Gillian. That's very kind of you. Thank you for keeping me informed and mentally stimulated this week. Trying to persuade my mum to put the heating on, as she said she was cold yesterday. Gillian, yeah, I get your mum to put the heating on. It's one of the things that we could really do that would help everyone, not just the pensioners, but in particular the pensioners, is bring down the costs of heating your homes, which have spiraled out of control in recent years because we are on the international regulations when it comes to the price that we charge for gas and oil and everything else. Phil's typing away there.
Sorry, just someone talking bollocks on my channel.
Breaking into the source code. Phil, so did you see the clip of Ed Miliband taking
Richard Tice? Yeah.
This is a really good point that, I mean, if you haven't seen it, please watch it, because Miliband absolutely destroys Tice, because Tice stands up, talks a load of bollocks about how renewables were going to cost X amount of money, the green agenda is going to cost £1.5 billion a year, and Ed Miliband stood up and said, because oil is traded on the international market and gases, we had to pay an extra £85 billion in 1 year because of the invasion of Russia. And it's very telling that people like Tice and Farage and these right-wing wankers, they're all in step with the how can I put this, with the, not agenda, because that's the name of our show, but with the interests, let's say interests of fossil fuel companies and tobacco companies and arms manufacturers and all the nice people in the world who are definitely looking out for our well-being and don't just see us as bits of meat that they can take money out of from time to time. Sarah White has just sent me the Chinese characters for administrator. This is quite cool. I'm sure one of them is someone measuring a tree. Bullywags, I do not like Afrikaans mixed as linked with apartheid and racism. Sorry if there's any Afrikaners in the chat, but that's my experience. Yeah, okay, I can see there's some cultural sensitivity there. And Ruth Guthrie says, my gas was 12 quid more this month despite being away for a week. Yeah, because it's surge pricing, isn't it? Maybe, Phil, let's rename what they do with the our energy bills. Let's call it surge pricing, and then it'll get...
I've already said what they should do. I mean, first of all, you should get rid of standing charges, but
yes,
I would just say, make all these utility companies break down on their bills like you do a council tax and just say where that money in your bill has been apportioned. Yeah. How much is spent on staffing? How much is spent on like materials, chemicals, whatever? How much on like accommodation, like buildings and premises and things like that? How much on research and development, and how much on profit?
Yeah,
just say that.
Yeah, profit, mostly profit. The oil companies, the water companies as well need to do that.
All of them should do that.
Well, let's wrap it up there because we've been blathering on for over an hour. So thank you very much for watching. Thanks to Phil for taking his time out from his busy honeymoon to talk to us this afternoon. We'll be back at 9:30 tonight. We're going to start a little bit later than normal for the Politics Social, and that's to allow people who are watching Maximilian's stream over on Max's channel to join us when we start rather than half an hour into the show. So if you'd like to join us for that, you're very welcome to do so. Join the chat, crack open a beer or a cup of tea or whatever you